Good morning. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you for joining me for today's Counselor Connect session on supporting school counseling advocacy efforts. Sometimes you need to toot your own horn. This session aligns quite nicely with this week's celebration of National School Counseling Week as we talk about school counselor advocacy and the ways in which we can inform others of all of the great work that school counselors do and really the true unique role of the school counselor. So thanks for being here. The slide deck you can access during, follow along with me during the presentation. The bit.ly is there on the screen. So be sure to grab that. And I will also try and go ahead and put that into the chat as well here really quick so you can follow along with our slides. Hello, my name is Amanda Callahan. I am the coordinator for Counselor Connect. Counselor Connect is an initiative operated by the Central Indiana Educational Service Center, or CIESC, in Central Indiana. And we support school counselors and social workers across the state of Indiana by providing professional development opportunities, networking, and collaboration. So thanks again for joining us. We are glad you're here. Please feel free. I know this is scheduled during kind of the lunch hour, so please feel free to grab your lunch. Hopefully you can sit and take a little break and relax as you soak in some of the information we will share. I want to start by again saying happy National School Counseling Week to anybody on the call who is a school counselor. For those of you who are not, I'm equally glad that you're here to learn a little bit about the school counselor role and the ways in which we can advocate for the profession so that counselors can have the time to do what they're truly and uniquely trained to do. So thanks for being here and joining us. You can see here some of the fun activities that we have scheduled for this week to celebrate School Counseling Week. We are taking over the Homegrown podcast during the entire month of February. We have this week an episode on school counselor advocacy with Indiana School Counselor of the Year, who was awarded in the fall, Lydia McNeely. So she talks to us during that episode. We have another episode on school counseling data, career counseling, and then educator wellness will be the last episode to be released later this month. We have a blog that was recently put on the website on school counselor advocacy from Melissa Rarick. She is a counselor in Noblesville, and excellent read if you'd like a very short, quick snapshot of some of the unique roles of the counselor. Of course, we have today's session, and then tomorrow we are going to be meeting with several school counselor leaders as we dive into the Dare to Lead book study. So a lot of fun things happening this week. Hopefully you can join us for some of those other things scheduled as well as today. I want to start by asking those of you who are with us to kind of share your level with school counselor advocacy. So how do you feel about it? Are you completely comfortable, a little uneasy, but you're really interested in learning more? Or are you very comfortable and you just love to advocate? So if you want to take just a quick second to put into the chat, what is your level of comfort with school counselor advocacy? Uneasy? Yep, I hear that. Okay, well, I think you're hopefully in the right place. As you say, you're uneasy, but you're interested in learning more. So thanks for sharing that. And hopefully today you'll pick up some quick and easy tips on how you can advocate for your role as a counselor. So today we are going to talk a little bit about data that can be used to inform your practice and also inform advocacy efforts. We are going to talk about the appropriate role of the school counselor. There are inappropriate roles that oftentimes can be assigned. So we'll look at both of those. And then we'll, at the end, wrap up with a couple of ideas for how you can share your program results with others. So first I want to start with why is advocacy important? And during our time together, we'll start with kind of the why, why is it needed? Why do we need to take on some of this ourselves and advocate for the work that we do? And then we'll move throughout the hour, we'll move into the how. So why is it important? Several reasons, but you'll see the first one here is to inform legislation. Every year during the legislative session, which occurs, at the beginning of the year for a few months, oftentimes there are some proposed bills that pop up that may not be always in the best interest of students, or it may be something that's unrealistic for to be expected of schools to do. So it's really important to kind of pay attention to those things and follow along, and when possible to advocate and to educate so that those bills are either not passed or maybe they are modified to be a little bit more realistic and something that will actually work in the school building. So you can see here, there have been several recently proposed bills that may not always be work quite well. There was a recent bill to require parental consent for ongoing and recurring consultation or intervention services for mental, social, emotional support. So that was one that raised some concern in the counseling field. And that was something that did not end up passing, but that's just one example of where we really need to just be vigilant and know what's happening during the session. To build capacity and increase student support. So obviously our role as counselors includes a lot of different things, wearing a lot of different hats. So just making sure that we are able to advocate so that, again, we have that time and that space to do what it is we're truly and uniquely trained to do. The ratio in Indiana is not good. It's the nationally, it's the highest ratio that just was released. Indiana has the highest ratio across the country. And it's also higher than the national average. So that's another reason why advocacy is very important for us. And then to inform services. So again, enabling us to be able to offer those services to our students that they really need, and that only school counselors are trained to provide. And ultimately, because our students depend on us. The next couple of slides include some data. This data was taken, it's statewide data, so taken from the kids count information that's available on their website. Just a few numbers I pulled here. I'm not going to read them to you, but you can see there's free and reduced lunch rates, chronically absent, expulsion, so how many kids are being expelled every year, and then academic scores, so proficiency in reading and ISTEP passage rates. So it's important so that we can help our students with some of these pressing needs. More data here, presenting needs in Indiana, child abuse numbers, youth residing in juvenile detention, children in foster care, teen deaths by accident, homicide, and suicide. So a lot of really daunting numbers here. And as you look at some of these numbers, you may think about your own community, your own school buildings. What do the numbers look like for you? And when advocating within your community for your role and the work that you do, I think it's important to share some numbers first. So kind of paint that picture of what does the student population and the community population look like for you, and why is this so important? So one thing you could do is just fill in the numbers for your own community, your own county, and you can access all of that on the Kids Count website. So again, because our students depend on us, they need us to be able to service them. So the next step is really truly understanding the role. For us to be able to be the best advocates possible for school counseling, we need to truly understand our role, what it is, what should we be spending our time doing. So to be a school counselor in Indiana, you have to have at minimum a master's degree in school counseling. Not everybody knows that. So that is important, minimum master's degree. Also meeting Indiana licensure standards, including the passage of the school counseling licensing exam. and then fulfilling continuing education requirements every 5 years or every 10 years, depending on your license type, through those professional growth plan points. And then finally, but very important, is we also are expected to uphold those ASCA ethical and professional standards. So continuing moving on, understanding the role, we want to work to maximize student success by helping all of our students. So we are looking at academic strategies to support them. We're looking at managing emotions. We're looking at helping them to plan for what is next after high school. So looking at those post-secondary. So obviously the academic, college, career, social, emotional development areas are all equally important for us in working with our students. We are expected to uphold professional standards, the ASCA standards and Indiana standards, and then also helping our students to meet the student counseling standards as well, which would include both the ASCA mindsets and behaviors competencies, as well as the Indiana school counseling competencies for students. Here is a nice little graphic we like to share, and this was actually borrowed from Hatching Results. So they take that MTSS triangle and they add the college and career component for counseling. So they refer to it as the multi-tiered, multi-domain system of supports, or MTMDSS. So adding on to that MTSS to include that college and career piece, which is so important for us as school counselors. So here we can see that counselors are providing services at all 3 tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. That tier 1, which is our kind of our curriculum, prevention, services for all of our students. That tier 2 then is, of course, those targeted interventions that we're providing a smaller group of our students. And then at the top, of course, is that tier 3, which is the more intensive, where we are maybe providing more individual type counseling. We are making referrals when needed to maybe outside agencies when the student needs even more intensive services than we are able to provide. So we are very critical component of this MTSS triangle within the building. This is a great way to share with your staff, to share with your administrators, some of the unique role of the counselors and how we fit into this MTSS diagram here. This is taken from the ASCA website. So some of the appropriate school counselor activities. You can see, if you take just a quick second to kind of look through some of these seem very appropriate for the school counselor. So this is where ASCA recommends counselors are spending their time. For a full view of this, there is a printable link on the slide, so it can take you there and you can access all of the content that's included in the appropriate role spreadsheet. So that's the kind of the ideal in the last slide of what our role should look like, what we should be spending our time doing. The reality is maybe slightly different than that. So obviously, as counselors, many of us are dealing with high ratios, legislative mandates, a lot of inappropriate activities, and then high level needs from our students and our families and our communities. So here's a snapshot of some of those inappropriate school counselor activities as defined by ASCA. Want you to take just a quick second and maybe share any of these inappropriate school counselor activities that you didn't really maybe realize were technically inappropriate. So take just a quick second. If there's anything on here that you see, go ahead and put it in the chat of, oh, I thought I was supposed to be doing that, but maybe technically I'm really not. Maybe that should really go to somebody else. So take just a quick second to add anything to the chat that may be surprising to you. Oh, sorry, this went through my mouse is very, there we go. Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything right now, so I'm going to keep moving. Oh, here we go. I do a lot of inappropriate activities. The biggest is maintaining student records. I wish that my administration was sitting on this. Yeah, well, this is recorded, so feel free to share the presentation for others to see and take the information, and you can even make it your own, put it into your own spreadsheet or slide deck, and then share it with your school board or your administrators. Yep, GPAs, coordinated school-wide IEP and 504 plans, attendance review boards. Yes, very typical responsibilities that school counselors are responsible for or play a pretty major role with some of those things that you listed. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so moving on to more of the reality of the counseling role. ASCA does recommend a ratio of 250 students to one school counselor. The national average, the latest data, which was from 2021-22, shows that the national average was ratio of 408 students to one. And the year prior to that was 415 to one. So moving in a slightly better direction, but not very much. And for Indiana, unfortunately, we in the 2021-22 data showed up as having the highest ratio in the country at 694 students to one. So that's very unfortunate. We had been pretty stable over the last 10 years in Indiana with ratios, but we have been among the 10 highest states, or 10 states with the highest ratio. So top 10 in a bad way, not a good way. So, but we had been kind of trending in a better direction. Our ratio seemed to be getting a little bit better. But then in this last, and it went, I think it dropped as far as 475 to one in the last couple of years. But then, of course, this year, or in this data, we see that it went way back up to 694 to one. In talking to a few people about maybe the reasons for this, what my understanding is how they calculate this is they take all of the counselors we have in Indiana and divide that by all of the students we have in Indiana. And that's it. That's where their calculation comes from. So in Indiana, we don't necessarily require elementary school counselors. There are services that are required at the elementary level that I will talk about, but we don't necessarily require elementary school counselors. So to me, I'm thinking that this ratio is probably a little bit better for secondary counselors, but it's probably worse for elementary counselors. So this is not necessarily a true representation of all K-12 ratios, I would say, average in the state. And additionally, on top of that, we do have about 200 less school counselors in our state in the last year. So that number is also dropping. So there's kind of really a school counselor shortage problem in our state, in addition to this ratio problem. So again, why advocacy is so important when looking at our ratios. So kind of going along with more of those responsibilities of the counselor and the duties of the counselor, there are several things that are mandated in the state of Indiana. There's showing here Indiana mandated curriculum and support. Not all of these Indiana codes directly state that the school counselor is responsible for these things, but in many cases, the school counselor is listed in the bill or the code, and or it's assumed that the counselor is going to play some role in making these things happen. And many of them make sense. I mean, like the bullying prevention, obviously that makes sense that the counselor would be very heavily involved in that instruction. Instruction on child abuse and child sexual abuse, obviously that's pretty clear cut. The counselor needs to be involved in that. The graduation plan, so kind of that college and career planning piece, of course, that makes sense. Career awareness, personal financial responsibility instruction. So again, these are required. All of these things are required in the state of Indiana, and counselors oftentimes play a pretty major role in making sure those things are implemented. Continuation then, our graduation requirements, obviously, keeping track of students and where they are when in meeting those graduation requirements. High ability, AP and dual credit, workforce training programs and certifications, the common electronic transcript, financial aid, suicide prevention, surveying students and getting consent to survey students, 504 plans, child abuse reporting, response, instruction, and teacher training. All of these things, counselors typically play some role in making sure these are implemented in the district. So what is the legislative support and need then for counselors? To be accredited in the state of Indiana as an accredited Indiana school, there are certain requirements that need to be met. One of them that is kind of checked off by the district when they're seeking that accreditation status is that they have that student services program in place so that they're meeting Article 4, which is the Indiana Student Services Rule, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. Also, it is required that school corporations shall, always means must, employ only student service specialists who are appropriately licensed. So that's really important. We oftentimes hear of somebody doing the work of a school counselor who is not properly trained or licensed. So maybe utilizing a teacher to act as the counselor. Not okay. You know, you can't do that, especially when you get into the mental health, social emotional learning, child abuse reporting, some of those types of things, very inappropriate to have somebody who's not trained helping with those kinds of things. And then you have the special education national rule, as well as the Indiana rule, which is Article 7. So taking a look at Article 4, which is Indiana Student Services Rule, this includes student assistance services and kind of defines those as prevention, assessment, intervention, and referral, similar to that MTSS diagram that we showed a few slides back. But school corporations shall, or again, must provide student assistance services at the elementary and secondary school levels. So these services are required K-12. However, student assistance services shall, so that means again must, be coordinated by a counselor, psychologist, or a school social worker at the master's level. So it does give a little bit of flexibility there in who is providing those student assistance services. Educational career services are also written into Article 4, and corporations shall provide educational and career services at the secondary level. So that's where we really require in the state of Indiana to have a school counselor at the secondary level with these educational and career services. And then it says here, secondary school educational career services shall or must be coordinated by a certified school counselor. So that's where that has to be in place. That's a requirement. And then corporations should, so there's a little bit, that's a little bit more lenient, not requiring it to be provided at the be provided at the elementary level, those educational and career services. So that's where it gets a little bit hazy there. Recommended ratios are also included in Article 4, which you can see here. They are recommended for the elementary for educational career services, 1 counselor to 600 students. So obviously well above the recommended ratio from ASCA. For secondary educational career services, 1 counselor to every 300 students. So that's a little bit better. And then for student assistance services, 1 counselor, psychologist, or social worker for every 700 students enrolled. So is Article 4 helpful? Yes, a little bit, but then it's also, it could be tweaked so that it would be more in alignment with what ASCA is recommending. And then those special education services. So looking at the federal legislation as well as Article 7 in Indiana, for special education, counseling services provided by qualified social workers, psychologists, guidance counselors, which they're using that kind of old firm of guidance counselors or other qualified personnel. So there needs to be these people in the buildings in the district to be able to provide those services that are written into student IEPs. Article 7 includes the comprehensive and coordinated early intervening services, which include behavioral interventions, evaluations, services and support, which oftentimes counselors are responsible for, or they assist in providing those services. And then the related services, including counseling services. And that's where those services may be written into a student's IEP. So let's look at some counseling research. Not going to spend a lot of time here, but I did want to link in several different studies. So if you do want to include some kind of research when you're talking to your stakeholders, when you're presenting to your school board, here's some different great links to a lot of information on research. I am going to share on this next slide, however, talk just briefly about the title. And I just alluded to this a second ago when I said that the federal special ed language still says guidance counselor. The title does matter, as was shown in this research study, where they found that when they, in a survey, when they asked people to share if they thought a counselor, using the term school counselor, or then other people on the survey received, the survey was all referenced guidance counselor. The people who responded to the survey with guidance counselor found the guidance counselor less competent to provide those services that school counselors are expected to provide. Whereas in the survey where the title was school counselor, those people were found to be more competent and able to provide those and qualified to provide those services. So from that, they found that yes, statistically, that yes, having that title of school counselor, other people perceive you to be more competent to provide those counseling services. So the title does matter. So this is important. You're encouraged, if you are in your building and in your district, if you are still called a guidance counselor. That's really kind of old terminology. Indiana Code a few years back replaced all references to guidance counselor with school counselor after some advocacy efforts to make that happen. The actual Indiana license itself is school counselor. It's not guidance counselor. So this is a little plug to, if you are still called a guidance counselor, inform and educate on the important reasons why you want your title to be school counselor. School counselor is kind of perceived to be more of that person able to provide academic, social, emotional, college and career services. Whereas guidance counselor, looking at that past role historically, was more providing just that kind of that college and career scheduling piece. So hopefully that is helpful. Moving on to demonstrating impact. This is a huge piece of advocating for a role. Can't just go and advocate. We can't just go present to our school board or to our administrators and say, this is why I'm important. This is why this position is needed. This is why I need to have more direct time with my students. We need to be able to share data to show our impact and to show why those things are so important. So looking at some data points to consider and then ways to document and track your data. So again, showing my impact is what I'm doing truly working. I want to be able to advocate for my students. I want to be able to advocate for the services I provide my students. And then of course, I want to be able to advocate for the school counseling profession as well. So how might we do that? Several ways. The first, which is kind of just looking at your counseling program as a whole. So this could be a great first step to assess your program. To do this, you can visit the Ask a Program assessment link and go through. It's free. It's on their website. You can just go through and fill out the questions with your counseling partners if you have other counselors in your building or even in your district. You might want to do this together at some point during some PD time to go through this assessment and just kind of get a snapshot of where you are and maybe in what areas are you struggling in your program. Reviewing student data is obviously very important. Doing this regularly, doing this at least annually to identify gaps, trends, and needs. This is very important, obviously, for that tier 1 level as you're scheduling to go into the classroom to deliver classroom instruction and those counseling lessons. It's important to know maybe what those high level needs are from your students. And then identifying those data points that you can impact. So the process, perception, and outcome data, which I'll explain more in just a second. Developing SMART goals. So making sure that with any goals that you do write for your students, that you're aligning with the district and school strategic plans and goals. That's always important. It's always important to have a seat at that table when your board or your district leadership team is meeting. It's important for the counselor voice to be represented. Identifying tier 1, 2, and 3 strategies, interventions, and supports, looking at who, what, when, where, how, and then involving stakeholders whenever you can, collaborating with teachers whenever you can. Maybe there is a lesson, or maybe with like character traits, for example, social emotional learning skills. How can we collaborate with our teachers to make sure that those lessons that we go into the classroom once a month to share, how do we make sure that those are truly infused throughout the entire class all year long with the teacher's help? So that's really important too. Implement the plan, document and chart your data, monitoring progress. So making sure after you do some kind of intervention or counseling lesson that you are documenting and charting what it is you do and monitoring progress over time. After you do all that work, of course, you want to share your results. So at the end of the year, after I've done all of these groups, after I've done all these classroom lessons, after I met with so many individual students, what impact have I had? And making sure I share that out with the people so they really know what I'm doing and that what I'm doing is working. And if things aren't working, that's okay too, because we can use that data as well to kind of restructure our program and change our interventions up. If an intervention isn't working, at least we know that and we can make changes. And then, of course, regularly assessing, reassessing, and analyzing our results is really important. The other data component that is important is time use. So how am I spending my time? And this can be done in a number of different ways, but you can look at your annual calendar, writing any tier 1 student activities that you are a part of, writing those on your annual calendar. So the career fair, for example, is oftentimes a counselor runs that whole thing, which is very time consuming, but making sure you're putting that on the annual calendar. Parent education activities, if you're doing anything like that, adding those to the calendar. And then, of course, sharing these with your administrators, parents, and stakeholders. So big snapshot, the full year. This month I'm doing this activity at the school-wide level, or I'm doing this activity at the 5th grade level or whatever grade level it is, and having that big snapshot of all of these different things that are happening. Weekly calendar is also important. And having this accessible to maybe, your teachers and your leaders to show, okay, I'm going into these classrooms this day during this time, I'm addressing these topics. I'm spending 80% of my time this week on direct services, or and here I'm blocking out this time so I can see individual students, and making sure your calendar is either available maybe in Outlook. If you use Outlook, for example, it's available for your teachers to see, so they know they can pull it up and see, oh, the counselor's busy during this time, so I know I can't send students down there, or I can't pop into her office to talk to her about a student because she's busy, it's blocked. So having that accessible there, or some counselors I know print it off and put it on their door each week so that people can kind of see when they're truly busy and can't be interrupted, and then when it would be a good time for them to send a student or talk to them. And of course, with flexibility, I will say, of course, if there's a crisis, if a student has to come down and see you, then that changes, obviously, some of what I just shared. But if it's something that can wait, then this is really important to be sure to have. ASCA has a time use form. It's linked on the slide that you can take a look at. Carrying the Torch, if anybody's involved in the Carrying the Torch Institute, or if they have created an account in the Carrying the Torch Inspire Success platform, there is a way to collect your time use there. So any way you want to do it, I know some people just create an Excel spreadsheet and put it in that way. That's okay too. Whatever works for you. It's a great idea to keep track of your time. And if going through the ASCA comprehensive counseling process to get to RAMP, they ask that you collect your time for 2 weeks, 1 week in the fall semester and 1 week in the spring semester at minimum. So you would at least want to do it twice to keep track of that time. But this is really important to share with your administrator, because you can also then break it down into, okay, how much time am I spending in direct service with my students or indirect time with my students? And then how much of my time is spent doing things that I really shouldn't be spending a lot of time on? So you can see in this breakdown, you should really be spending 80% or more of your time either in direct service or indirect service. And then that system support is really 20% or less of your time should be spent there. So how do counselors really impact data? This can be tricky. In some cases, it may be hard to say like, oh, as a counselor, I'm really having a direct impact on this data. So that's kind of why we look at all kinds of different data, which you can see here. So starting with our process data, that's just who, what, when, where, how long. And I'll show you a snapshot of what that will look like here in the next slide when we talk about that core curriculum action plan. So this is just your process data. So if you're running a small group, for example, who are you doing it with? What are you doing it for? What's the topic? What's the need? When are you doing it? Where, how long, or how often? And then also equally important is kind of who's responsible for that. So that would just be your process data. So that's really easy data to collect. Shouldn't take really any time at all. That's just quick and easy. Your perception data is then looking at the attitudes, skills, and knowledge. So where is there that behavior change as a result of what you're doing? So if you're going in and doing a classroom lesson, trying to identify that perception data and what you expect to change as a result of that lesson that you're going into the classroom to deliver. Same could be applied for a small group. If you're doing a small group, what behavior change do you want to see as a result of that small group? And then your outcome data includes that achievement related data and then the achievement data. So achievement related, again, I think it's easier to have to show that direct impact between what we're doing as a counselor and that change from the student. So attendance could be discipline referrals, a little bit easier to connect. And then that achievement, I think, is where it gets a little harder for that direct connection. But over time, with those prevention lessons, with those intervention with small groups, and then of course, even with individual students, we truly can make an impact on that achievement data. So what could this look like? So this is an example of a core curriculum action plan. And you can see kind of everything I just shared in that last slide is mapped out, very nice and easy to read in one quick shot. So and you can put any service that you provide, you could put into this core curriculum action plan. At the kind of that tier 1 level is really what we're looking at first. So here you can see, I'll just go along the top line to show an example, your grade level. So with our 11th graders, we are going to be helping them with their course selection. Here are the Ask Them mindsets and behaviors that we'll be addressing. For the curriculum content and materials, we're going to be looking at their transcript. We're going to be comparing that to graduation requirements, seeing maybe where they're at on that path. You know, are they on track to graduate on time? We're going to be looking at credit recovery and grade enhancement, looking at CTE, whether maybe the student is trying to be a CTE completer, so kind of making sure that they're on track for that. Do they want any dual credit or AP courses? And then looking at any kind of sports eligibility if that's applicable. So there would be your content for what it is you'll be helping your students with. We're going to be doing it during quarter 3. It's going to be presented to students during advisory. 600 11th graders. I'm doing this with all 600 11th graders in the classroom, so classroom level. And then here's our perception data. So what kind of behavior changes are we expecting to see for attitudes, responsibility for graduating, and also for post-secondary readiness. We want our kids to know how to analyze their transcript. We want them to know how to access any credit recovery options if needed. We want them to be knowledgeable of graduation requirements. And also we want them to be able to analyze their transcript and select their courses. And then you have your outcome, which is your achievement related and achievement that would eventually be an outcome from this work. So you can also, so this is that tier 1 core curriculum going into the classroom, delivering this to all of your students, maybe at a certain grade level. And then you can also really do this action plan for tier 2 services too. So maybe you run a lot of small groups. You could, map all of those things out on your your tier 2 action plan. And this is really great for, again, if you want to share what you're doing with your stakeholders, you could give them this. You could show them that this is what I do all year. This is the core curriculum I'm providing, and this is the impact I'm trying to make on my students. Here's some different options for data collection. So how do we track this? How do we keep track of this? Obviously, a lot of counselors, I think, use their student information systems, which can range obviously across the state. I know different schools use different products, but a lot of people do use this to track some of their data. The Carrying the Torch dashboard, again, I mentioned earlier, which is the Inspire Success platform, which is free for Indiana schools to use. There are some trackers in their system. I know Indiana Career Explorer has some different ways to track, like the graduation plan, for example. Zello, Naviance, some of those other tools also have some tracking systems that can be used. The Tier 1 Core Curriculum Action Plan that I just shared was a simple Excel document or Excel Google Doc. So that's easy. Anybody can use that. It's free. So you can track, obviously, that core curriculum tier 1, and then also you can create a separate one for your tier 2 services. As far as sharing results, when should you do that? It can vary, but it might be suggested to do it prior to district school-wide planning and goal setting. Also to do it at least annually. So maybe it's important to do some of that this spring before the school year ends. Again, it may depend on when your district does your school-wide planning and goal setting. That may vary a little bit, but it might be beneficial to do it sometime early spring, so that then that can help plan for next school year. Who should I share this with? Really anybody that will listen, I would say, but definitely your school board, administrators, parents, community members, legislators, anybody you can share this with to show your impact in your role is a great advocacy tool. And then, of course, why? Just to answer why does our counseling program matter? Why is it needed? And how does it impact our students? Here's some different ways to share your results. There is a flashlight presentation template linked here. This is also from Hatching Results, but this is really, it kind of outlines for you what should I include if I'm giving a brief PowerPoint presentation to a stakeholder group. What should I be sure to include in that? So this is a great starting point for you. You can take some of the information I've shared too in this presentation, take that and put in and drop it into a PowerPoint to help your stakeholders understand the reason for that ratios are a concern, some of the legislative mandates that you're responsible for, what are those appropriate versus inappropriate roles of the counselor, what is my role in the school, what are the things I'm doing, and then what is the impact I'm having on my students. There's an ASCA advocacy toolkit on their website that's linked here, some sample press releases and sample social media posts. Just some quick tips for advocacy, staying current in your practice, follow that legislation, proposed legislation that impact counselors. If you are able to advocate in some way, and maybe that is just starting small with your school, maybe that's just first starting with educating on your true role with your administrator or your teaching staff, or then maybe getting bigger with your community and your school board. But then eventually, if you really become interested in taking that next step to advocate even more, like at the state level, there are plenty of opportunities to do that as well. So grabbing a seat at the table, making sure that you are a part of any district and school improvement teams, creating a counseling advisory group is always a great thing to do, because then you can get, not only can you share with your community members on your advisory what you're doing, but you can also ask for feedback. How am I doing? What do you think I should be doing better? What are the needs in the community? And how can I as a school counselor provide service to respond to some of those needs in the community? Designing your program, of course, around your data, your school and student needs, using the title school counselor instead of guidance counselor again, and then really trying to build that relationship with your administrator, making him or her very aware of what it is you do. The more they can be in on the work that you're doing and be knowledgeable of what you're doing, then they may be able to assist in creating more time and more space for you to do some of those things that truly matter as a counselor. And then educating your stakeholders about the school counselor title and role is very important, because we oftentimes forget that not everybody knows what we're really trained to do and provide. So it's important that we keep that in our minds, and we're able to then share that with others who may not know. Here's some different ways to take action. Of course, sharing your program results we've talked about. If you're a RAMP school, if you've gone through that whole process, promote your RAMP status. There are tons of different ways to showcase what you're doing. Obviously, social media, sharing it with your community members at a meeting or a staff meeting. You can share some of the work that you're doing. School website, newsletter, the flashlight presentation that we mentioned a few slides ago. Connecting with existing advocacy efforts, which I'll share a couple of things here in just a second. Be respectfully active on social media. So when you are offering a program for your students, take a picture of it and put it on Twitter. Show what you're doing on Twitter. So the more you do that, the more traction you're going to get. If you have parents that follow you on a social media site, they're going to see all the things that you're doing. They're going to want to be involved. They're going to want to have their child participate. They're going to maybe advocate for the work that you're doing as well. And then finding and contacting your legislative rep. So here are some different examples of things I found on, I think, Twitter. So just some different ways that we can advocate, showing what we do. That one up in the right-hand corner, get the facts. How do school counselors identify needs? So there's one, SEL at the bottom right, talking a little bit about that, showcasing any kind of celebration month. So National Bullying Prevention Month, talking about what that is, how that impacts students, and what kind of service do we provide for that month. If you want to go another step further in your advocacy efforts, here is how you could contact your legislator. Some questions to consider if you do want to reach out to your legislator. You could talk about challenges and barriers that school counselors face in accomplishing their goals. What resources, training, and support do you need? Maybe you don't have access to it. Maybe you don't have the funds to support you in getting that training. What are some recommendations for legislative support? So it's always good if you have a concern that you're expressing to the legislator, maybe having a suggestion for a suggested solution for that challenge. So that would be recommended. There are some advocacy letter examples linked here if you want an example. And then you can see how to actually contact your legislator too if you want to reach out. Some other tips, obviously make sure you contact your correct legislator. Somebody also mentioned maybe instead of always just contacting the legislator when there's something that you need or a complaint, I guess, maybe instead being proactive. So to do that, you could invite them to visit your school. You could send them an email, ask them to come to your school, see some of the great work that you do with your students. You can give them a tour of your school, invite them to a classroom lesson, something like that, just for them to to see, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that counselors do all these things. So more of that proactive approach in getting in touch with your legislator. Being respectful and concise, of course, telling your story, making it personal, and again, offering solutions rather than just voicing a complaint or a concern. Maybe include how if this changed in this way, this would be really beneficial for my students. Again, the importance of staying current in the legislation. So I've linked here both the Indiana Administrative Code, so Indiana laws related to education, and also Indiana State Board rules. So you can access both of those here. There's also a way to sign up for ASCA alerts, linked here as well. Funding sources can be a little bit trickier. We did recently, the Department of Education recently released that comprehensive school counseling grant, which was due December 16th. Hopefully some of you on the line maybe applied for some of those funds. Those don't come around very often, but when they do, of course, we want to jump on those to try and access some of those funds to provide more services to our students. There is oftentimes the general education funding, which in some cases could be used in some ways. Grants for mental health counselor licenses. This one I italicized because I don't believe it's currently, sorry, my mouse got away from me again. I don't believe that's currently funded. So that one may not be accessible right at this moment. There are some other grants listed there, the Safe Schools Fund, which can be used sometimes for some of those mental health type services, especially special education funding, and then the title grants. So talk to the people in your district who oversee finances. They oftentimes are aware of some of these funding sources and have a little bit more information. The Department of Education has information on their website about some of these. Check them out, dive a little deeper and see if there are ways in which some of these funds could be used for some of the services that you provide. Who can support our advocacy efforts? Obviously, our professional associations, ASCA, ISCA. ISCA actually has an advocacy committee. They have a lobbyist, a paid lobbyist who communicates information to their members, keeps them updated on during the legislative session on what's happening. And then they also have regular meetings with Dr. Jenner. So ISCA is very involved with advocacy efforts. So that would be an awesome first step if you want to go deeper beyond just the advocacy at your community level. I'd say join ISCA's advocacy efforts to take that next step if you're interested in that. Obviously the DOE plays a very significant role in advocating for the profession. They oftentimes will, during the legislative session, will inform, educate when there are bills that come out that may not be realistic. They will oftentimes kind of chime in and share why that wouldn't be, why that might not work, and then maybe provide some solutions to fix the bill. So they're typically involved with that. And then other agencies such as Counselor Connect, we can also assist in supporting your advocacy efforts. So from Counselor Connect, we identify annual priority topics through an annual needs assessment for school counselors. That will be actually coming out most likely in March. And on that needs assessment, we ask you to identify those topics where you feel you need more support. And then from there, we build out our calendar for next year, for the next school year, to be able to offer training, blogs, DIY PD guides, other things that could be of assistance to you in getting more information and becoming more educated and feeling more ready to be able to deliver services on that topic. We offer free and low-cost professional learning options, best practices shared by like-positioned colleagues. So most of our Counselor Connect presentations that we offer are delivered by school counselors and social workers who are on the ground, who have that direct experience and can really share those best practices and what works for them in their schools. We also offer a lot of networking opportunities where you can share with each other, you can brainstorm with each other, you can share things that work and don't work. So another great opportunity there. Here are some different tools and resources, different ways for you to get connected. So the Counselor Talk listserv obviously is a great way to hear what's happening. We offer through Counselor Connect a monthly newsletter where we try and share quick snapshots of things, kind of need to know things for that month. The ISCA Advocacy webpage is another one, and the DOE Moodle. Access PD on demand. So here you can see a couple of different options from Counselor Connect and ASCA for some free webinars that are posted online after they are live. So as we're wrapping things up, a few things to consider. Why is advocacy important? What are the benefits? What is one thing you'd like for your representative to know about school counseling? And what is one concern you'd like your representative to know regarding the profession? So think about that, especially, this week is National School Counseling Week. So what is one thing we could do this week to advocate for school counseling? And then finally, some action steps. Think about 2 ideas for advocating, especially this week, like I said, to celebrate National School Counseling Week. Write your idea down. Please feel free to share in the chat if there's something you think, okay, I think I'm gonna take this one little step and do this one little thing. Feel free to share that in the chat with us. Contact a thought partner. Maybe it's another counselor in your building. Maybe you can get together and think about, okay, what are some ways in which we can increase our advocacy efforts this school year yet, or maybe next school year, some things to think about. And then of course, reach out with any questions that you have after our session. I am going to pause. I know we are getting short on time here. So if I have any questions though, happy to take those. You can add them to the chat if you want. And as I'm gonna, you can feel free to add any questions to the chat. I am gonna scroll through to get to a couple of other slides. This slide is ways in which you can connect with Counselor Connect. So there are live links here. If you want more information, you can click on those. I also wanted to add our session evaluation for today, which also includes a PGP point. So this was an hour-long session, so that will be an hour or 1 PGP point. And to request that, you would just click on the link and complete that session evaluation. And then the last slide is on upcoming events, which I also wanted to share. We are doing a Dare to Lead book study for counselor leaders right now. Our first live chat is actually tomorrow morning. If you want to register, there is still time. We have, after tomorrow's session, we'll have 3 more live chats. We're taking over the podcast, Homegrown Podcast this month in February, Prepare training in person in March, Solution-Focused Brief Counseling with Dr. Russell Sabella, which is an ISCA event hosted in Indianapolis in March, and then Discipline Reimagined is in April. So hopefully you can join us for some of these upcoming sessions. I am going to go back to give you to link in the session evaluation, but I will stay on the line in case anybody has any remaining questions. If not, thank you so much for being here today with us. Appreciate your time, and please feel free to reach out with any questions.